Hey everyone, I'm Sam. I'm the founder and CEO of Writesonic. I'm an engineer turned marketer. We built Writesonic more than 5 years back now, and currently it's a full stack AI visibility platform. So tracking content, SEO, agentic workflows, the full stack. And we work with a lot of Fortune 100, 500 companies like Amazon, Unilever, NP Digital, a bunch of other brands as well. And very excited to have Mike King with us today. He's like the OG of SEO. He's the founder and CEO of iPullRank. And they work with enterprise brands like SAP, American Express, HSBC, a bunch of other ones. I think Mike can probably name them. And he was also named Search Marketer of the Year twice, I think once in 2020 and then again last year by Search Engine Land. He also wrote an AI search manual and also a book on SEO engineering, I believe. And then I think also read somewhere, Mike, you recently started calling yourself Chief Relevance Engineer. So would love to learn a bit more about that as we go through the conversation. So yeah, I think that was a quick intro. When it comes to the science behind how SEO or how AI search actually works, there's no one better to talk about that than Mike himself. So let's give a warm welcome to Mike here.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Cool. So, just in terms of the agenda, we'll keep it a very sort of open discussion, sort of like a fireside chat. We are not doing another how AI search works webinar where we are just talking about, certain like generic metrics and stuff. We'll actually talk about how you should actually execute AI search, what kind of actions you need to take, and yeah, we'll sort of go from there. So, I think just to get started, Mike, I think one of the most important things that we see initially when we work with brands on our side also is on the data infrastructure side, like the prompts itself. So most people right now don't have a clear understanding or distinction between prompts, how prompts relate to keywords. So like what are the right set of prompts to use when you are using an AI visibility tracking tool, and what kind of intent, what kind of sort of how many prompts, all those kinds of things. I think that's one of the most common questions that comes across from any SEO person or any CMO, any marketer there. Would love to understand what's your thought process behind that, and yeah, we can discuss on that.
Yeah, I mean, we generally start from keyword research because that's going to be the best proxy for what people are actually searching for. But the reality is that there's far more intents in AI search than there are in classic search because people are looking to do things. Like it's far more than the navigational, informational, transactional. So there are a lot of prompts that's going to be difficult for you to discover, but really you've got to use keyword research as the proxy for understanding. So, if there's a high volume of searches related to your brand, then there's going to be likely a high volume of prompts related to your brand. The problem is like there's no, accepted source for that sort of information. Like I know a lot of the tools are creating these like prompt volumes tools where they're generating volumes based on clickstream data or whatever, but there's just not a generally accepted approach to that. And a lot of them are kind of just reducing things to entities anyway. So again, like the standard keyword research is going to be your best proxy for it. As far as the number of prompts, I mean, I think it really just comes down to, what is important to your business. And you want to have as many prompts to get enough of that surface area to get a sense of where you stand. And you don't want to have like, a million prompts because that's not actionable. That's too much information. You want to really focus on the areas that your business is trying to improve visibility and ultimately action on.
Great points, Mike. I think so. I think what you covered, the traditional SEO keywords and the volume there, that's of course important. What are your thoughts on also leveraging own customer data or data from, sales conversations, maybe that as a proxy as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you have access to that, because a lot of times marketers don't, but if you have access to those sorts of conversations, especially if your organization is using a tool like Gong, which will allow you to like identify the trends and what things are being said, that's super valuable because of course those are questions or actions that users are taking in AI search. So, whatever data sources you have, like if you have audience research, that can be super helpful. And that's one of our filtering mechanisms as well, because we build personas for clients and we use that to determine like what the keywords that we should be targeting are. And in the same way, we're using that to determine the prompts. And then another thing with our approach, which I think a lot more people are starting to adopt, is we're not just tracking the prompts themselves, we're also looking at the synthetic queries that are used a part of the query fan out. And then what we're doing is we're tracking the rankings in classic search for those queries and then mapping that to the passages in the content, computing relevance scores, things like that, because that tells us like where we need to make adjustments. So when we're doing our keyword research at this point, it is like kind of multi-tiered, right? It's like here's what the user's typing in, here are all the queries behind it, and then here's what you do based on that.
And I think you have one of the best pieces on query fanouts. Specifically, I think you did it on AI mode, I believe. I'm not sure if you have done it on ChatGPT or any other models, but I guess it's similar concept on, how these models work. In terms of query fanouts, so we talked about how many prompts, right? So let's say, for example, just take an example, if I am an SEO tool, uh, some queries for me could be what is SEO? What is search engine optimization? It's similar intent, but I think what a lot of people try to do is write every variation of that prompt to try and sort of, have like hundreds of those prompts there, right? But I think if we talk about the query fan out and we look at the overall sort of the query space, right? So if I have 100 prompts or if I have 50 prompts, I think if the query fan out space for that is the same or almost similar, let's say it's 90% similar, do you think that it
Mhm.
matters whether you have 50 queries, which is covering the same amount of query space compared to 500 queries there?
If the query space overlaps a ton, like you're saying in the query fan out, then no, you don't necessarily have to like track everything because ultimately you're going to perform across all that stuff. And it's a good point because if you are tracking the query data from ChatGPT, you'll notice that there's a lot of variation. Like it'll be the same query, but they'll change one word. And like we did an export for a client for that had like query data going back like 3 months, and it was like 100,000 or more synthetic queries, but a lot of them were really similar. So what you got to do is like some kind of semantic reduction of that, and then figure out like what is the core ideas. Otherwise, like you're going to be tracking a ton of stuff that's impossible to get an understanding of. So yeah, I think the first step is collecting that data, reducing it to something that's actually usable, and then targeting based on that rather than going after like the whole query universe,
Right.
especially because there's just going to be like little nuances of difference.
Makes sense. By the way, folks who are joining in, so the Q&A is open. We'll take up questions after, we discuss all of this. So feel free to keep typing your questions in the Q&A section. We'll get back to it towards the end of the call. Mike, another thing to get back to, if we talk about the intent, like, with SEO, there's the different intent queries, transactional, commercial, informational, all of those. With this whole AI search thing, in terms of prompts, what do you think should businesses be focusing on right now in terms of those intent? Is it more like commercial or should they still focus on informational intent? Because that's going to get picked up by these models anyway for a lot of the generic things, right?
Well, it depends on your goals, right? Like if your goal is just visibility, like focus on wherever you want the visibility. Um, And I think we all know at this point that the traffic, the referral traffic from these channels is limited. So, if you're like, hey, I'm more focused on the transactional intent, then yeah, go after those queries. But I think it needs to be um, like a combination of them because it's a journey, just like any other search. Like users ask, they have like multi-turn sessions. So you want to figure out like how can you appear in a variety of those responses. So I don't think it makes sense to just focus on like one over the other. I think you need to think about the whole series of steps that the user goes through.
And what do you think about like in SEO we used to have or we still have short tail queries, there's longer tail queries. Are the shorter tail queries still relevant for prompts or should the user just be focusing on longer tail?
I think it's more long tail at this point because what we saw when ChatGPT had first released, the search GPT or whatever, users would literally click and say like, "Hey, I want you to search." And then they would kind of go back to that frame of mind of like a shorter query. Now that that is not explicitly there, they're just interacting as though they always do with ChatGPT. So, and even in Google, we're seeing that the queries are getting longer as well because users are starting to understand that like the input box is a lot more capable than it was before. Because historically, Google would only take in up to 32 words in a query. Now they're like, cool, put whatever you want in there. And Google has been pretty aggressive over the last 2 years of like communicating that through their advertising and so on. So, so it's continuing to stretch, and that's where you need to go for sure.
Makes sense. And I think you coined this term relevance engineering as we were talking about it earlier. Maybe you can talk a bit more about it because as an engineer, I think that's very relevant in terms of how, this whole information retrieval and the search landscape is evolving. But would love for you to
Yep.
explain it in not non-technical, but in simple terms for marketers to understand as well.
Sure. So relevance engineering is really the confluence of AI, information retrieval, content strategy, UX, and digital PR. It's the evolution of SEO. Because think about being an SEO. Like to be a good SEO, you're really just a power user of Google. Like, things like search operators, how to use Google Search Console, regex, but you don't necessarily know how things work, right? Like, and everything is being built right in front of us these days. There's open source equivalents to everything that these platforms are doing. And SEOs are paying attention to the wrong thing. They're the folks that keep saying like, "Oh, nothing is different. It's just SEO." There's a lot of things that are different right now.
Yeah.
And to deny that is, I don't know why people do it. I'm guessing it's largely out of fear because things are so confusing and you're not getting the results that you expect anymore. So my point with relevance engineering is that we can know how things work and we can replicate in simulated environments what these platforms are doing. And so, we have a variety of tools here at iPullRank, but there's also tools on the market. As an example, Market Brew, I think is a great tool that has been like reverse engineering Google's algorithms for a long time. And it really just looks at like every component that's possible. And then it says, okay, these are correlating factors with what is happening. Here's why you lost your rankings. Here are the things you need to adjust in order to make improvements. And what I'm saying is for AI search, Google, OpenAI, all these platforms, they are actively sharing what they're doing and how they work. So we can learn from that and then figure out where the opportunities lie. Like I was one of the first people to say like, hey, query fan out, I think that's the place where we can play. This is the place where we can actually have impact on what these models are doing. And I only knew that from all the research that I was doing, all the, you know, looking at these white papers, reading these patents and so on, and then testing things and again, replicating it so that we could figure out what we need to do. Now, the people that are driving this right now aren't the SEOs. It's really like what people call like the Python SEOs, like the people that
Mm.
were engineers already and been doing a lot of experiments, people like Dan Petrovic or Metahan, or like all these sort of folks that are like really digging into it from an engineering perspective and then bringing back the insights. And so that's the power of our community. It's that it's like everyone like sharing things. And when you go back to when SEO first started, it really grew out of developers. It wasn't like marketers first, it was
Right.
developers. Because back then, everyone, you were a webmaster, you did everything. And so there was a subset that were like, hey, let's figure out how this search thing works. And they started from understanding information retrieval. So relevance engineering to some degree is like going back to that. It's going back to the idea of kind of first principles around how systems work. And these are the components, meaning AI, IR, CS, UX, and digital PR that need to be affected in order to move the needle on these sorts of results.
I guess even marketers need to turn into engineers now using Cloud Code and other things in the
Well,
market.
that's the thing. That's the thing. Anybody can do it now.
Yeah,
And to ignore that is, first of all, silly, but it's, I used to work for somebody who said to me, he always would say this, it would be like, when the rate of change outside of your organization is way faster than your organization, it means your organization is dead. And so to some degree, we're watching that happen with the SEO community. Like they're sitting there acting like, oh, well, nothing has changed. It's all just SEO. But the world is saying like, no, this is a different thing. We expect more here. And SEOs are like, kind of getting in their own way, blocking their blessings, as they say, because this is the opportunity where people are like, hey, here's a blank check. What resources do you need? And SEOs are being like, oh, it's just SEO. Well, if it's
yeah.
just SEO, people have a framework for how that's supposed to work, which means it's cheap, it's free traffic, it's something that doesn't get resource. So it's really stupid that so many people are acting like nothing has changed when they're missing out on the opportunity to really change how this world is operating.
Fair point. Fair point. I think one of the folks had a question in the chat. I think you have a tool called Qforia. So I think
Yeah.
Nikolay asked, will that be further developed for query fan out reduction on the platform?
Yeah, so we have a internal version that does a lot more. And in the coming months, I intend to release that. Excuse me. As far as like query reduction, Qforia doesn't give you a ton of queries. Like I think it maxes out at like 40, and there's not a ton of overlap between the individual queries because all of them are aligned with, both the intent based on the intents that are indicated in the various patents around query fanout. And they're also mapped to different content types because there's an expectation of content types from the model for each query. So there's not a ton of like duplicate queries in there.
Makes sense. And we talked a lot about query fanouts. How do you think that relates to, the actual rankings or showing up in terms of visibility or citation? Is there like a direct correlation that you have seen there? Like what exactly does someone need to do with those fanouts?
Yeah, the way I look at it is it's like a raffle. And for every query, you want to have as many raffle tickets as possible. So the more that you show up across the fan out, the more opportunities you have to perform. Once you get into, the synthesis aspect of it, you have no control. And so really, you're just trying to have as many candidate passages as possible. So, um, the real work is that you identify the queries, you see how you rank for them, and then you see what your relevance is on a passage level for each of those synthetic queries. And then you compare that to other pages. Particularly, you want to compare it to the citations. So you can say, okay, well, this citation has a passage relevance of, X, U, or Y. Okay, now let's make improvements to these series of passages so that we have more opportunity to be selected by the model. Now, there's a lot of evidence that what is selected by the model isn't exactly what is on your site because there's like the extractive summarization of it. And so you got to be like kind of pinpoint accurate with where you're making your adjustments. And, from what I can see thus far, there's still not enough tooling in our space that allows us to like analyze the content on that level. And it's my hope that as things continue to evolve, we will get more of that because it is a pretty somewhat manual process at this stage.
Makes sense. That makes sense. And also, I think Again, on that query fan out thing, I think last couple of days since GPT 5.4 came out, there's been a lot of this stuff that, okay, 5.3, at least 5.3 stopped showing fan outs on the logged out mode and also the logged in one. Do you think that will have an impact in terms of how you would, take the actions or optimize for AI search there?
So, from what we've seen, and it may have changed in the last few days, it is only for the logged out that they stopped showing them. But again, there's a lot of overlap between what is generated between the different platforms. Like if I showed you what we get out of Gemini and compared it to what we saw in ChatGPT, a lot of those queries show up on both sides. So to some degree, it's kind of like keyword research itself. Like we all know that the search volume data that we get for keyword research isn't real. It's like at best it's triangulated.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be kind of the same sort of thing. It's like, all right, well, for this query, here's what the fan out typically might look like. So if you're seeing it here, you're likely seeing it there, and then kind of that'll be that. It's unfortunate that ChatGPT is doing that because that was such a rich data source.
Makes sense. That's not, but are you suggesting that, let's say, even though let's say ChatGPT in the future removes it even from 5.4, the query fanouts that will come from ChatGPT would be almost semantically similar to what Gemini is giving? Is that like a good?
Yeah, they're similar, but again, you could also build a Qforia for ChatGPT. Just ask the model, because the model itself is where they're getting
Yeah.
the query fan outs to begin with.
But how do you determine, like, in terms of that rewrite logic or that sort of, fan out logic, how do you make sure that's, accurately similar to what ChatGPT is doing though?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the criticisms of what do you call it? Of Qforia. They're like, oh, people say it's not real data, it's coming from the model. So again, in our internal version, we've solved that problem. And I offer this information to anyone. What you can just do is pull all the citations and then pull all the keywords that they rank for, and then reverse intersect those. And then you get a sense of like these were likely the synthetic queries that were used for this subset of pages. You could do the same thing with the citations in ChatGPT as well, right? Like you just pull those, see what they rank for in Google. Because
Yeah.
again, at the end of the day, they are searching Google. And you could do that reverse intersect to say, okay, well, these are likely the query fan out queries that were used.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So I think wanted to take a minute to, so I did some analysis on this, I think over the weekend. There were some very interesting insights here. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Um, So there are a few interesting patterns. One is, of course, GPT 5.3 instant, whether on logged in or logged out, does not show query fanouts. 5.4
Hmm.
still shows it. But I think there were some interesting observations. So just to quickly understand what I did here is took like 50 queries or 50 sort of prompts from different categories, let's say for SaaS, e-commerce, services, trends, a bunch of them, and then
Hmm.
different intents also. And I took those 50 prompts and made a script so that on ChatGPT itself, sent those 50 queries to 5.3, 5.4, 5.2 instant, 5.2, just to do a comparison there. There's one very interesting, a couple of interesting findings there. I'll quickly talk about that. Um, so in terms of what I think GPT 5.3 or 5.2, the previous models, they used to consider a lot of third-party sites there. But that I think is changing with 5.4. So if you see here, for a lot of the queries, the first party citations that are being picked by 5.4 are much more. So, for example, if the query was or the prompt was best CRM for B2B SaaS, GPT 5.3 cites these sort of editorial or sort of news websites, right? Like third party blogs. Whereas 5.4 cites a lot of the actual kind of product sites or service sites there, which is like a very interesting observation. And another thing here is if I scroll down, this again, depending on the category or the industry, this varies quite a bit, but still GPT 5.4 has a lot of those first party citations, which is changing a bit because I think there was a study, I think few months back where third party sites used to get 6 to 8 times more prominence as compared to first party, like your own blog, your own product pages, pricing pages. So that's that. Another thing is the overlap between 5.3 and 5.4 in terms of the citations. That is quite low. In terms of the citations, both of them are picking up. And the reason for that being, if we go here, if you look at the queries, fan out queries that 5.4 is doing, it recently started adding the cite, parameter here.
Mm.
So earlier, on average, if it was doing, let's say GPT 5.2 with thinking, if it was doing 7 or 8 queries on average, now it is doing double the queries because half of
Mhm.
the queries are actually these site parameters. So what is happening is that earlier it would just, get that data from third-party blogs that, okay, what are the best CRMs? It would get it based on those third-party review sites and those comparison posts and then link back to your that same blog. But now what is happening is it has started pointing back to the product pages of the actual company, like the product or the service company. So due to that,
Yeah,
that UTM source parameter, UTM source equals chatgpt.com, that was already there. I think we have, at least in the last few days, started to see much more traffic come in from ChatGPT because it is adding that parameter and it is linking back to our product pages, pricing pages, those kinds of things. So I think that was,
interesting.
yeah, that was quite an interesting finding. And this is again data where we have gone deeper into it. Another thing here is also this one, by the way, GPT 5.4. If I zoom out, this is the distribution. So domain restricted 34%. When I say domain restricted, it is searching for specific product, their sites. Then site
Hmm.
operator and open are the ones where it is doing the actual review sites and all those random sites that popped up there. So quite a few things are changing with 5.4. I don't know how it would impact the other models, but just wanted to share some interesting findings, and especially pricing pages have started to pick up quite a bit, and it has reduced the amount of blogs that was picking up from the website, like 5.4 specifically. Now 5.3 is still the default model, so probably for most users it would still stay the same. But anyone who is using 5.4 and if they continue with that method, I think there is a major change here that is happening.
No, this is fascinating. I was not aware of this,
Yeah, I think just
but
over the
you
weekend I
just did
did
it
it.
this weekend.
Yeah, yeah, because I was hearing a lot of this, that fan outs are not visible and all those kinds of things. So I just wanted to do some analysis there. Also, another thing, uh, I think a lot of people say that ChatGPT is using Bing or Google as the web search index. Uh, Again, did some analysis on that. So actually, out of those sites that it was citing, 44% of them are neither in Google nor in Bing. Like if I see the top 50 search results,
Yeah,
which
we've
is
seen that too. It's been from some other data we've seen, it was something like 62%.
okay, interesting. So I think, what do you think about that? Because then does it mean that ChatGPT is using their own index or doing something there?
No. So there are rumors that they use other search engines like Tavili and Exa in addition to Google and Bing. Um, and from those platforms, they actually get a lot more information about the page from their SERPs than you get
I
from
see.
Google. Like some of them will give you like full summaries of the page. Some of them will give you a lot of elements from the page. So I think that has something to do with it.
Interesting. Interesting. Cool. No, makes sense. Now, just moving on from there, let's get into the actual actionable part, which is the bigger focus of this webinar for today. So we talked about tracking how to come up with prompts and stuff. Now, in terms of actions, do you have like a defined sort of priority set of action items that you work with your clients to focus on in terms of off page, on page, technical, any other things that you focus on?
Yeah, it's far less about off page for this sort of stuff. Because a lot of it is improving rankings for long tail queries that don't necessarily require a lot of link building. So, again, a lot of it is like mapping the synthetic queries to pages and elements of those pages, and then scoring those elements against, the queries themselves. A lot of it is thinking beyond the website itself because, to have more of those raffle tickets, they need to live beyond just what's on their .com. They need to be thinking about their shared, owned, and earned properties, thinking about YouTube, thinking about Reddit, so on and so forth. And so, based on that, there needs to be like a much bigger conversation because we're talking about a content ecosystem. And to say like, hey, you need video, that usually means we need to tap in with other teams. But the whole point here is like making more relevant content across that ecosystem so they have more opportunities. But another big component of it is measurement because
Hmm.
most folks are looking at this like it's classic search and they're only thinking about the referral traffic and the performance metrics and so on. But the way we think about it is in three different buckets. So there's like the performance stuff, which is what it's always been. How much referral traffic do you get? What is the conversion rate? Yada, yada, yada. Then you got your channel metrics. So like your visibility metrics in those channel, share of voice, citation rate, things like that. And then the more important things where the actionable stuff lies is the input metrics. So again, going back to the things I've referenced so far, um, how well you rank for your synthetic queries, what's your passage relevance scores, what's your bot activity, and then we have a whole bunch of NLP metrics that we've derived on our side that give us more granular understandings of things that we can improve. So, when we're talking about how we actually do this, we start from the keyword research, which we talked about is really identifying the synthetic queries. Then we're going to do an omni-media content audit where we're looking at all the content ecosystem, figure out where the gaps are. Then there's an omni-media content plan that says these are all the assets that need to be created. On the technical side, we have an AI search audit where we're looking at, all the under the hood stuff. So one of the things that we've seen happen a lot that isn't talked about much in the SEO space is the 499 response code.
Hmm.
And with that, what happens is the client, or in this case, the AI bot, gives up on waiting for your page to load, and then you lose your eligibility for visibility because they're just like, we're going to skip this page. And so the way that shows up in your logs is the 499. 499 is not an official response code. It's not in the specification, but it was one developed by Nginx and adopted by a lot of the CDNs. So you'll see a lot of that specifically from ChatGPT because they are requesting your pages in real time. It's not an index. So those are the sorts of things that we cover in our AI search audit. Then we do the measurement plan around all the measurement stuff that we talked about. And then from there, because often there's like some C-level attention on this. So they want to see like what's the high level roadmap. So we build out an AI strategic roadmap as well. And then the actual execution is like, what sort of content optimization work do we need to do? What sort of content creation work do we need to do? What sort of technical optimization work needs to be done and so on. But a lot of it is like thinking about it strategically differently than you would for classic SEO.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And let's say if we focus on that on-page aspect, right? Do you think compared to SEO, like what are the elements in that content that changes in terms of, I think, for example, there's a lot of frameworks like the Bluff framework, right? Bottom line up front. There's the FAQs people talk about. Then you talk about the paragraph level, semantics and those things. So what changes compared to, let's say, 1 year before in terms of the page structure and the content length, all those kinds of things?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the latest correlation studies are showcasing that saying whatever needs to be said at the top of the page works best. I mean, with that, that's a thing that goes back to classic SEO as well. But I've seen, citations from deepened pages as well. So I don't know that you have to do that just because that's what's like most prevalent. Um, but beyond that, I would say it's more thinking about it from a more multi-dimensional lens because most people are just going to be like, okay, I'm going to go to my page on my website and optimize accordingly. But yeah, again, it's far more about making more things across that query fan out that fulfill those semantic gaps. So yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest point of difference is that sort of thinking. But then there's aspects of again, strategic thinking. And the example I like to give is pricing pages. Because a lot of the play for classic SEO has been like, okay, well, don't put pricing on the page because I want the lead. But when you do that, yes, these platforms are going to go look at your pricing page. And they're probably going to do it more with these site calling queries that we're seeing. But if you don't have pricing there, they're going to get that pricing from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then you miss out on the opportunity to indicate what your pricing is to the market. And it could be like G2 Crowd or whatever random blog post they found it on that is saying your pricing is X. So you got to think about things like that because you may not have that be a part of your marketing strategy because of how the previous channels worked. And you may want to figure out like, okay, well, we want to say something about what our pricing is rather than having like a competitor website saying our pricing is whatever it is. In fact, that's happening to us right now at iPullRank, where, I searched for iPullRank last night and there's some random agency that has a blog post that's like, hey, here's what seven competing agencies with iPullRank do and whatever, whatever. And so that's being fed into my responses for generative AI. So we've got to have an approach to make improvements on that so that, these other people, whatever they want to say isn't what's being said about us via ChatGPT.
I think that's a very valid one, especially the pricing thing that you talked about, right? Because I think that's one of the most common things where if you don't talk about that on your own content, on your own website, someone else will do and the competitor will take advantage. So need to be
Hmm.
hyperactive with those kinds of things there. That's a very valid one. Um, and then I think again, coming back to the query fanouts, do you see, let's say, query fanouts as sort of keywords like primary or secondary keywords that need to be used as part of that content? Or like how would you pass that information to, let's say, a content marketer or a content writer to take advantage of?
Yeah, the way we do it, we have something that we call our content engineering brief. And we're identifying not just the keywords themselves and the entities and all that, but also the questions that need to be answered, the structure of the page. And then we also will do all that work ourselves in our content optimizations. But if it is a third party that we're working with, we are developing these very detailed briefs that are saying exactly how they should write. We're not saying like, okay, this word must go here, but it's like use these words in these ways, answer these questions, structure your headings in this way, so on and so forth. But when we do that, there's very much that feedback loop, a semantic feedback loop. So historically, there's plenty of tools out there that do similar things like that, but they're all based on, BM25 or TF-IDF, so all
Mm.
the lexical stuff. Our approach is focused on the semantic stuff. So there's that feedback loop of saying like, here's how you need to structure things so that it can score better in this way. But yeah, it's very much less like giving a blueprint for how to improve the page.
Makes sense. And then very quickly again, covering the off-page side of things as well. You talked about Reddit. There's also Wikipedia, G2, all of these industry forums as well. So
Sure.
I guess just putting it into two categories. One is sort of third-party blogs, and second is UGC/social websites, right? How do you see those as part of this strategy?
Yeah, I wouldn't classify that as off page because when people say off page, they start thinking link building, and I that's not what I'm talking about as well. But I get what you're saying. So on the UGC side, I mean, I think it's more about to some degree like reputation management, right? Like it's like making sure that the brand is there, the brand has a voice in the discussion. Ideally, they be driving everything back to their subreddit where they own it. Where it's like, okay, there's a conversation about the brand that's negative. They come in and they say, well, here's what happened from our perspective. And then they link to a thread on their subreddit that goes into more detail on it. Like that's the best way to manage that. Of course, there's a lot of people that want to do like astroturfing and like, post acting like they're not the brand and
Right.
bigging up the brand. I mean, that's not really what I like to do, but I get why people do it. Um, and then beyond that, like I think it's a combination of things. It could be again a combination of the shared owned and earned properties. It could be people doing microsites. It could be digital PR. It could be, you know, working with third-party blogs and writers to make sure that they're talking about your brand, or at least like conveying your messages, not necessarily like, you know, doing sponsored posting or whatever. But the whole point is that you want the information to be in a variety of places. Again, so when these platforms are looking around and getting the information, they're seeing consensus in the information across the web. So then that informs their response. And then there's the aspect of the whole like common crawl element to this, where how do you make sure that your information is getting crawled more by the common crawl? Um, there's a variety of ways to do that. One of which is like if you're syndicating content, that means that there's more opportunities for the common crawl to index it. And then when retraining happens, it's getting pulled from there. But the primary thing I would say is make sure you're not blocking the common crawl bots, because a lot of people do that as well.
Yeah, yeah. Good points. And I think you already talked about measurement, right? That's one of the things, that's one of the most common conversations at enterprises or any kind of company. There's certain new metrics that came out, which is, again, AI visibility, citation share, all those sort of things. There's the SEO metrics, which is traffic. And then there's conversion metrics or your MQLs, SQLs, all those. How do you think that
Hmm.
links together, and how do you think attribution works in this case so that you're seeing some ROI come out of AI search as a channel?
Yeah, I mean, it's a cascade, right? Like going back to the model that I had where it's input, channel, and then performance metrics. The input metrics give you the visibility. The visibility gets you the clicks, which gets you the revenue. But, there's nothing to tie everything together, right? Like there's no Search Console for ChatGPT, and Search Console is kind of worthless for the AI surfaces in Google. And so I think what's ultimately going to happen is like the media mix modeling is going to like become the prevalent way of stitching this together, because again, these are primarily brand channels. They're not primarily performance channels. However, you should still measure, the performance aspect of it, because there is some subset of users that will click through and take action. And the ones that do click through tend to take action more because they've educated themselves pretty heavily before they got to this point. So, you should treat it as like high funnel, low funnel sort of thing, right? And you have the low funnel understanding through the performance metrics, and you can see what that looks like. But ultimately, once we have more of that media mix modeling in play, brands will be able to understand what the actual impact is from these channels.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And just coming to like the future of AI, if we talk about, right, there's ads coming in ChatGPT, there's agentic commerce, things around that. What's your view on, let's say if we talk about ads to start with, it's almost like what AdWords was, I guess, 20, 25 years back, right? But with a bit more personalization, contextual responses, all those kinds of things. What's your view on that? How do you think that would change organic AI search going forward?
Yeah, I think that's the future of all this, right? Like, I think the future of this technology looks like the film Her, where it's like you've got these assistants that proactively do things on your behalf. And one of those things is going to be buying stuff for you, like things are going to be so connected where it's like, your refrigerator knows that it's out of milk, and then it sends something to an agent and then buys the milk on Amazon or whatever it is without you even needing to do that. So, um, I think it's going to be less about the explicit searching and more about the user's implicit needs being acted upon in these environments. So it's far less about, like how do we optimize for the channel? It's going to be more that the feed itself is the content. So how do you optimize the feed? And I think that's one of the core differences between Google Shopping and the agentic commerce protocol via OpenAI. Because with Google Shopping, they've always wanted parity between what's in your feed and what's on your website. They even have bots that like go out and put things in the cart and see if prices change. Like they're double checking that pretty heavily. Whereas with OpenAI, they're just like put anything you want in the feed. So it's definitely a different thing that needs to be accounted for based on that. Whereas I think a lot of people are just going to try to slap their Google Shopping feed
Hmm.
into this environment. So yeah, I think that's the primary thing to think about. Like, what is the content strategy for your agentic shopping feed?
But do you think content, let's say in the next 1 or 2 years, still remains relevant, or certain kind of content remains relevant, given that a lot of, it is being done by AI itself?
Um, yes, because you still need inputs about the thing, right? Like, if I make a product that doesn't exist anywhere else, like, what is AI gonna tell me about that product? What is it gonna say about my brand? Like it's gonna try to infer things based on, what exists that's similar, but you need to be the person that provides the information that has the nuance to it because everything is going to get a lot more hyper personalized. And so having broad information in a hyper personalized environment is going to make you invisible. You need to be speaking directly to your audiences so that when they're, basically filtering information to show to the user and, they have the embeddings that represent that individual user. If your product doesn't align with that, or your messaging of your product does not align with that, you're going to get filtered out. So yeah, I don't think it's enough to just like rely on AI, like leave it to its own devices to decide what your product is. You still need to be positioning it for the marketplace.
Makes sense. Last question from my side. I think right now, if you've heard of all of this open class stuff, there's agents, agentic workflows, all those kinds of things. Have you tested them out? How do you think that applies to SEO or search specifically? And which things to use it for, which things to avoid, like programmatic SEO and all those sort of things?
Yeah, this is the funniest thing that I'm watching people talk about in the SEO community. They're saying like, "Oh, you can't automate your SEO." Yes, you can. Because everything we do in SEO can be expressed as an ETL process. For anyone that doesn't know what that is, extract, transform, load. So think about this, right? Anytime you do a rank tracking report, you're extracting rankings from Google, you're transforming them into a spreadsheet or something, and then you're loading them into a PowerPoint deck. Like a computer can do all those things. And so programmatic SEO is getting like a pretty bad rap right now because people are getting those whole like Mount AI things where it's like, oh, you perform and then you drop off. That's not just because of AI. That is a UX problem. Google cannot reliably detect generative AI content as a signal in isolation and be like, oh, demote this content just because of that. So they don't. And if anything, they're using like watermarks and trying to detect those because Gemini does have watermarked outputs. So what they do is they use user signals, user interaction signals to indicate whether or not this is good content. It's what they've always used, right? They're using clicks, they're using um, not bounce rate, but the equivalent on the IR side. So it's like abandonment rates or whatever. And typically, Gen AI content has high bounce rates and low time on site. So if you have better UX, that content ends up being more sticky and then it performs quite well. I know this because we've done this programmatic SEO stuff since 2020 when we were using GPT-2, and we've gotten great results over long periods of time with our clients. So, you know, the idea that SEO can't be automated is again just people fearful because it can if you do it right. And what we're doing as an agency is we're embracing that. We're looking for opportunities that we can be building software, building automations into the work that we're doing. But everything is human in the loop. Like we're not just saying like, hey, spin up a million pages and no one ever looks at this stuff. Like anything that we're doing, especially on the programmatic SEO side, we're incorporating, rich data points from the client's data model. So it's like unique information that's being fed. And we're structuring content in such a way that it's like there's a full content strategy behind it. We are never going to be like, give me 1,000-word blog post, ChatGPT, and then throw that on the website. If anything, we're going to follow the client's content model and have it generate everything on a component level using a customized RAG pipeline. So every time it generates a component, it has to go back to the index to learn. So it has a much lower likelihood of hallucination. So there's a lot of approaches to make everything work a lot better than what people are seeing in the wild. What you're seeing in the wild is people just being like, "Oh, this could be great. Let's just throw ChatGPT
Yeah.
at it." And then you get something that works for a little bit and then stops working. So I completely believe that, you know, all this agentic stuff, whether it's like OpenClaw or, the sort of tools that you guys build for your customers and all that, like that is the future. And you got to embrace it and figure out how to make it work for you. Otherwise, there's going to be competitors that do, and then you're just going to get left in the dust.
No, I think that human in the loop is one of the very important points there. Like you can't also fully leave it. But at the same time, I think having proper engineered workflows which are, using RAG, using some sort of governance aspect to it, that's super important.
Mhm.
Yeah. Awesome. So I think we can get to some of the questions. We have a couple of them in the chat and then some of them in the Q&A section as well. So we can probably pick from there. Um, okay, I can
Let's
start.
go with Brad's first. Let's answer
Yeah,
that one.
let's go for it.
So Brad is saying, or Brad Gilmore is saying, small business owner here, therapist. Shout out to you. You doing the world, the most important work in the world. Wondering if I should switch all of my energy and funds to AI search and drop SEO. Absolutely not. So classic search is an input for AI search. So if you just switch everything to AI search, you and ignore SEO, you're not going to be as successful as you want. And that's not to say again that there aren't nuances of difference. There certainly are. But classic search is also where a lot of, if not most of your performance is coming from. So you as a therapist, I'm assuming you're trying to generate leads. And so again, like a large percentage of your leads are coming from people that are just typing in Google, clicking on a result, and then reading your stuff and then submitting. Um, you should be doing both at the same time because your SEO efforts will give you more surface area for AI search. But again, you've got to make adjustments to your pages so that your surface as an answer for AI search as well. So I definitely don't recommend you dropping everything. SEO, I would say probably split it 70-30 because that's likely going to be the value that you get back as well.
Yeah. Cool. I think we can go with the next one, which is, I guess, one of the first ones. Do you have any recommendations on the number of new blog posts we should be publishing each week for AI visibility? It's a very, yeah,
It's a very SEO question.
yeah.
SEO questions are always like so quantify this for me. How long should my blog post be? Like, should they be 1,000 words, 1,500 words? And now this person is also saying, how many blog posts do I need per week, per month? That's always going to be driven by what you're targeting. If you're targeting 10 keywords, you don't need 10 blog posts a month or a week or whatever. You just need the comprehensive information for those 10 keywords. So that question, like I can't answer that question for you. I will say that freshness does come into play here. So it could be more about like how often should I be updating my content? And again, that's going to be driven by like how often should it be updated? If it's something around mortgage rates, which change every day, then yes, update that every day. If it's something that's like, about when the Super Bowl is, that changes once a year. So change it once a year. So you basically just got to use, um, you got to make business decisions based on what makes sense for your business and have that drive your content velocity.
Right. I think next one we can pick, how would you advise regarding optimization for product pages as compared to, let's say, blogs for LLMs?
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty much the same, right? Like they're still extracting these features. Schema, a lot of people disagree with me on this one, but I believe schema is super valuable in these environments. So I would definitely look to use the schema vocabularies that aren't the typical ones that just get you rich results in Google. Um, and yeah, I mean, making sure your content is structured in a way that is extractable. Again, using headings, using, the right markup to show where things begin and end because they're looking for boundaries in the content when they're extracting features. Depending on the model, right? Like some models are just doing it with hard character or token counts. Some are looking at the layout of the page, but the more you structure your content and make the boundaries clear, the easier it is to extract the components from it.
I think also just to add to that, the agentic commerce thing from OpenAI, I think it's called the ACP protocol. So that product
Yep.
feed schema that they've given, I think there's also images, videos, and there's certain new parameters that they've added to it as part of that schema. So again, don't know
Hmm.
how relevant it is, but I guess that might also be one of the factors for rankings and then reviews, ratings, all those things as well. Yeah. I think Sabrina has a question. How should brands be thinking about benchmarking and how should we be thinking about success within LLMs and attribution contributions, specifically revenue?
Yeah, I think the benchmarking needs to be comparative because, we're so early right now where, um, again, what's mostly driving this is your visibility in classic search. Not everything is like we just talked about there being a huge subset of results that are not that. But as far as what you control, you want to compare how they're performing in the subset of queries or prompts that you are targeting. Also look at how they compare in the synthetic queries and how they perform there. Benchmarking their passage relevance, benchmarking the traffic that they're getting. Some of the various tools out there will give you some idea of what the referral traffic looks like. So yeah, benchmark it against your competitors. And then if there's and oftentimes we'll see like one competitor is just dramatically outperforming the other ones. And so that's where you start. You're like, okay, well, the potential here is, in a lot of cases of the dramatic outperformance might be like 20, 30, 50x. So you're like, cool, here's the opportunity. Here's where we stand. That's where our benchmark is. And then beyond that, I mean, just look at what you're getting out of your analytics. Like what referral traffic are you getting? And then once you back into those other metrics that you've got, you can say, okay, well, this visibility is yielding this performance. And we know that there's a lot more visibility to have. So let's say we've 5x our visibility. Okay, we should expect a 5x down here as well.
Makes sense. I think just also picking a few questions from the chat. What immediate steps a brand can take to move one step closer to be prepared for agentic commerce? And can you
Uh,
expand on what you mean with optimized feeds?
sure. So immediate first step that they can take is hiring iPullRank.
Nice plug. Yeah.
Um, Nah, but yeah, I would say again, like starting from the measurement of it is the best place to look. Like see where you're at, where you stand, and then that can drive the action plan of what you need to do. Now, on the agentic commerce side, again, I think it starts with just building out the feed, right? Like take a look at the spec, see what you've already got in your Google Shopping feed if you have one, and then figure out where the gaps are. And we wrote a blog post on the different, or I wrote a blog post on the differences between them that can be a good place to start where you think about, how to make the adjustments. And I'm sure Garrett is searching for that blog post to drop in the chat right now.
I think you shared a link. I don't know if that's the blog post, but yeah. Yeah. I think next question. In a world of zero-click searches and AI-generated answers, is organic traffic still a reliable success metric? If not, what KPIs replace that?
I mean, traffic was never the measure, right? Like it was always kind of an intermediate measure. The measure is always like what business objectives does the channel meet? And I think people get so caught up in traffic because for a long time there was that direct relationship between, that and the downstream success measures. But I wouldn't completely give up on organic search. And I think a lot of people are thinking that way because it's not a growing channel for a lot of folks, but it's still a channel that's yielding a lot of performance. And in fact, the more that we see the AI overviews showing up in um, the results, the more we're seeing like higher conversion rates because again, those users are educating themselves before they click through. So again, the traffic was never the value. The value was how many people are actually doing the thing you need them to.
Awesome. I think we have gone through almost everything, so we are on time. So yeah, Mike, I think this is exactly what we wanted. We went through quite a lot of things. We went into the technicalities of prompts and query fan outs, all those things. We went into the actions. So a lot of really great insights from you. Really appreciate that.